Our second Operators and Manufacturers panel focuses on satellite operations. Mr. Furster once again moderates a panel of distinguished industry members. Mr. Furster.
Thanks again. Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for sticking around. We're going to move now to the from those who build the satellites to those who operate them. And satellite operators kind of face their own sets of challenges and opportunities as we see pressures on government spending. And most of the folks here are pretty active in the U.S. government market. And we've also got U.S. military operations winding down in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we're fortunate today to have a good cross-section of the satellite operations industry representing both the traditional fixed satellite services operators and the mobile services operators. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists now. To my left is Matthew Desch. He's the Chief Executive of Iridium Communications. To his left, Samer Halawi, Chief Executive of Thuraya Communications. Next, we have Tip Osterthaler, President and Chief Executive of SES Government Solutions. Then we have Kay Sears, President of Intelsat General. And on the end is Andrew Sukawati, Chairman of Inmarsat. So welcome, everyone. Same drill as last time, no opening statements. I'm just going to go right into Q&A. So if you've got some questions for these folks, start thinking of them now and get them up here. We'll try to work in as many as we can. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is, I think, one that can be addressed to all of the panelists, so I'm going to run down the line on this one. We've seen some indications of a softening in demand on the government side as operations wind down in Iraq and Afghanistan. On the other hand, we've heard that this could be a boon to satellite operators because it increases reliance on UAVs and other kinds of sensors that are real bandwidth hogs. So what's the reality here? We've heard from, for example, Intelsat and Inmarsat that there's some softening of demand here. So what's the reality here? I'm going to start, because I mentioned Intelsat and Inmarsat, let's start on the end there with Andy and work our way down.
Good. Thank you. Well, clearly, and we were very public about it, as things started to change in terms of operations in Afghanistan, we saw a decrease in expenditure there, both by U.S. forces as well as coalition forces involved as well. And that sort of comes with the territory. We're about 40% of our business is governmental, about half of that U.S., about half of that NATO and UN. Governments, and that business tends to be variable by events. And to some extent, that's what we're built to do. We have a global network. It has events that some of long duration, some of short duration, and you take the benefits of it when those things happen, and when they don't, you scramble to try to get revenues from other areas. And certainly we saw, for example, benefits in the Arab Spring in North Africa occur as an offsetting element. So, it's what happens. UAVs setting it off, well, there's been some of that, but clearly not enough to set off the entirety. I hate to say it this way, but more events will happen. It's the nature of the world we live in. And so we are continuing to invest because we know as events occur, more and more demand results for the likes of us up on this panel. And we're trying to put the best capability in place so when the next event happens, we're in a position to do that. In our case, we're investing in a new constellation of broadband satellites, and they're both military and commercially tunable. This is the Inmarsat 5 GXs, and we think, this is an event that is somewhat predictable. It lasted longer than people thought, but we'll see something happen again, and we'll be there ready for it.
Thanks. Kay?
Yeah, I think we've had a modest impact on mostly the Iraq drawdown. Not surprising. I think what was surprising is how fast it happened, which I think had to do with the renewal of a status of forces agreement, and we had to get out quickly. So we expected that, and it's been very modest. I think, and it's mostly been an X-band. I think But as soon as capacity comes back into our fleet, it's quickly consumed for other types of applications, whether it's UAVs or other types of small profile mobility applications. And I agree with Andy that it's an event-driven thing. Certainly North Africa is a hot area right now. We're seeing new task orders and demand for that area. We've had a lot of discussion about the Pacific region. We're positioning now to cover that area. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see this concentration that has happened, massive amounts of capacity demand in one particular area. It's going to start to spread out. The UAVs that are being flown, they're going to have to be flown more globally as we pull out of Afghanistan and reposition the troops.
So, Kay, if I could follow up real quickly. You said it happened kind of quickly in Iraq. Do you see that as sort of a temporary blip and that demand will once again go up in the Iraq region?
Maybe close by Iraq. But no, I think we're out of Iraq, yeah. But I think Afghanistan is going to be a very different drawdown. Certainly our relationship with the Afghanistan Ministry of Defense and what we're doing to support and train the Afghanistan military, it's not going to happen overnight the way it did in Iraq. We're going to continue to support them for a long time.
Thanks. Tip?
We're seeing the same things. The rapid pace of the withdrawal from Iraq, I think, was a bit surprising. I think there's still scope probably for additional ISR applications that may take up some of that capacity that was released as a result of the drawdown. I think there's a lot of uncertainty generally within the Department of Defense now, too, about what actually is going to happen in Afghanistan and when. Because during a presidential election season and during the kind of budget as part of the budget environment that we find ourselves in right now, some unexpected things could happen there as well. So I think people are being a little bit cautious about contracting additional capacity more than what they might need, and they're starting to feel the budget pressure as well. So those things are going to have an impact on our business. As Kay said, there are other demands or other applications that generally take up that capacity because one of the realities of our business is quite often the emerging commercial markets are in the same regions as we find ourselves engaged because of the accompanying political instability that you find as power relationships change in various parts of the world. So we're not terribly alarmed about it. One other force that is at play here, which I think we don't like to talk about, but is out there, is that the WGS system is coming online as well. And for whether we like it or not, from the perspective of the user, WGS capacity is free. So it's very attractive, regardless of what you might have to spend on terminals, regardless of what you may think the system actually costs. From a user perspective, it's free. So it's as it comes online, it puts more capacity in specific areas, and sometimes that'll have at least a short-term impact on our business.
And we're going to get back to the WGS question in a minute. Samer, first, perhaps you can tell the audience a little bit about how active you are in U.S. government markets as a mobile operator.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I want to thank the Space Symposium for having us here. I think this is our first year here, and for those who are not as familiar with us, we're an international company. We're based in Dubai. The UAE is a country that is increasing its ties with the U.S. government from a political and military point of view. We have offices in Washington and Singapore. We have over 100 shareholders. Many of them are from the U.S., including Boeing. We do work with the U.S. government. Today we support the BFT program. We work a lot with DoD logistics companies. Over the last year, we've had a lot of successes, but also with MODs from around the world, NATO MODs in particular. To address the question that you had, I think that there's three elements related to that question. One is there's the troop withdrawal, the U.S. troop withdrawal. There's, second, the adoption of solutions by other MODs other than the U.S. DoD. And there's also the budget tightening issues. And in terms of the troop withdrawals, although there's, in one area there's some softening, but they have different requirements. They have requirements for comm on the move, for example. They have requirements for terminals that are less visible, more discrete terminals that work, terminals that are available, that are not affected by weather, and we are very well positioned in this area. The second one is, as I said, with the demand that is growing from other areas around the world, We have had multiple successes with the French, British, and other MODs over the last year. So there's a lot of demand popping out from different parts of the world. The third one is the tightening budgets, and as there's tightening budgets, people are looking more and more at value solutions, and it's good for the customer now to know that there are alternatives that they can identify and look at and choose the best. And we're positioned well because we offer solutions that kind of offer the best of both worlds, the FSS and the MSS, because we have small on-demand devices that could also offer flat fixed fee packages. So we can offer that with terminals that are discrete and that give them what they're looking for in terms of comms on the move.
Thanks. Matt?
Well, you know, we're a little different than some. We have seen a little bit of softening. We haven't seen a dramatic change, but I think it's because we don't really provide sort of bandwidth on demand. We're a bit more of a solutions-oriented play that has, over the last 5 to 10 years, really embedded itself in some very unique places. Our strategy was always really to diversify, and to do important things for our customer. And so as we move from sort of a point-to-point voice phones into machine-to-machine, tracking assets, logistics, into higher speed services, and then now into tactical radios, our business is sort of expanding on that basis. So even if one piece of it shrinks a little bit, the overall business looks like it's going to continue to do pretty well. I think in the general, obviously, I think, and probably Sammer's in the same way, and maybe perhaps Inmarsat are kind of the first guys in a lot of times, but the DoD has their own systems, and so in a place like Iraq and Afghanistan, you then play backup role to purpose-built systems that actually perform much more specifically for the task and function. But now that we're moving much more to expeditionary type approaches, it actually plays well to our strengths, and we see ourselves, the guys supporting the NGOs and the people, the State Department and all the other organizations that are behind, that track assets, that track things coming back and forth. And frankly, we don't just get put away for someday when there's another conflict. We actually go into the toolkit and are used anywhere in the world. So I don't think it's going to be a dramatic change over time. I think it may slow down some growth for a bit, but I think it's more about doing more.
Okay, next question. I'm going to pick up on the point that Tip raised about the WGS system. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's 4 satellites up there now with plans to expand to 10. We've brought allies on board as partners in this program. I'm wondering if it's had any measurable effect on your business to date and how you see that evolving over the next several years. And I want to include Andy in there as well, because you've obviously got the Ka-band system coming online. So why don't we start, let's start with Kay on that one.
So, I mean, the constellation of WGS satellites, they'll be a very sophisticated system. And I think over time, when all of them are deployed, we will see a tempering of demand for commercial capacity. But demand comes in many different varieties and forms. And what is critical for the future is for the military to have their own systems, but have also the option of commercial capacity. The diversity of frequencies, the diversity of spacecraft, the flexibility that commercial can often offer. Different applications require different types of satellites and frequencies and power. So I think that's the real critical piece here, is that the WGS system is going to perform a great function for the military, but they're going to continue to need commercial bandwidth. And so for whatever is tempered by our capacity, will be backfilled with other applications, probably mostly disadvantaged terminal applications and mobility applications.
Who wants to go next? Tip?
Well, the WGS creates a special kind of challenge for our industry. There's a significant amount of overlap between the sort of typical COM-SATCOM model and commercial SATCOM models when it comes to the deployment of WGS. as Craig Koenig said in the earlier panel, there's a lot of commonality even in the components of these spacecraft. It's built on what is essentially a commercial bus. But over the long term, the people that are developing applications are somewhat insensitive to the bandwidth demands that they're going to create with those applications. So I think there'll be disruptions, particularly when a WGS first goes into a region. But in the long term, it seems like there's an insatiable appetite for bandwidth, and there'll always be other applications that rise up. But I think we do need to think about when we make decisions like this, and the U.S. government decides to acquire and own and operate a system, what I would like to see happen for the future is a more deliberate and rigorous analysis of the costs, because when the government goes into a business to compete with a commercial alternative, there's rarely a real apples-to-apples comparison of costs, and I can't find anyone who actually can tell you what WGS costs. You know what the program costs, but what the capability cost is an entirely different question. And I think maybe in the future, when we're more constrained than we have been in the past as to what things we're going to own and what things we're going to lease or leverage out of the commercial environment, we'll find a more rigorous analysis. I would hope that we would. And I think if faced with a decision again, we may decide to spend that money on something that only the government could do rather than something that commercial could do.
So Andy, how does this affect your thinking, the expansion of WGS as you gear up for moving into Ka-band services?
Well, the WGS program has been around for a long time, longer than any investment decisions we took on this. And you know, WGS, whether it's 6, 8, 10, or more, you know, people have had to plan for that. And we're partnered with Boeing in developing a new constellation of satellites that's targeted both at the commercial marketplace and as a complementary system to systems like WGS. And to the extent they bring more NATO involvement and other countries' involvement in WGS, we see that as enhancing the complementary nature of what we can provide to them as well. So we're not dependent on, you know, whether WGS is 8 or 15 satellites ultimately in our demand model. Obviously, the more WGS you have, the more it cuts into commercial business. But I think everyone's seen the forecasts. Applications are growing and growing dramatically. And I think we say with some confidence, we can see demand over time exceeding the supply that's out there, including the WGS supply. So, you know, that's kind of the bet we're making. We also go to market somewhat differently than some of the others. We don't sort of look for a contract to fill a satellite before going up. I mean, that can be it's a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, from various perspectives. But we more or less share that commercial risk with the commercial marketplace when we put up these satellites. So our demand model is focused on both military as well as commercial applications, and we see a really robust demand developing across the board for that, probably a little bit less the more WGS that goes up.
If I could follow up with that, and any of you three who wants to address this, feel free, but a lot of the UAVs in operation today are equipped to transmit via Ku band. As WGS builds out with its Ka-band capabilities, do you expect this to help spur a transition to Ka-band for UAVs? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay.
Well, so, I mean, almost all, I would say, close to all UAVs are Ku band today. And I think, back to Tip's point, you know, we're handling that mission really well, the commercial operators are. We're providing capacity and we're building new capability into future satellites to handle ISR requirements and the doubling of medium to large RPAs that the military is going to invest in. So as a mission set or as an application, however you want to look at it, we are there today and we'll be there in the future to support that mission. So why transition and spend the dollars to retrofit all of these platforms with Ka-band terminals? I think the WGS system is going to get filled up with Army requirements and with ground types of requirements. I'm not sure that you would want to load up the WGS system with all of the ISR. I actually don't think you could. I think it's not going to fit. So what we need is we need clear direction about what commercial can do in the area of ISR and allow us to build those capabilities and evolve the technology so that we can continue to keep that on KU band. We need to leverage all frequencies. We don't need to concentrate military requirements into military frequencies. If we do that, we're going to be stuck. So terminals need to be built flexibly to handle both commercial and government frequencies, and we need to separate out mission sets and allocate the right resources so that we don't end up with no capacity in terminals that only work one frequency.
Okay, next question is for our L-band operators. What's the future of L-band in government markets? For example, Andy is moving into Ka-band. You're an L-band system. You're an L-band system. What are the trends there? Are they favorable, unfavorable? Let's start with Matt on that one, if we could.
Well, I mean, L-band is a technology. It's a place on the spectrum dial. It's not a specific capability or any more than the low end of the FM dial is different than the high end of the FM dial. I don't really see L-band as being, and I think in fact if you're seeing anything that's happening in this industry, it's that the market requirements and the industry is sort of converging in lots of ways. The FSS, KA, KU band guys, the L band guys are starting to work together in different ways or working against each other. Our approach is, first of all, L band is a great band to work in. We have global coverage. It provides unique sets. One thing I would say we focus on more than anything else is not allowing ourselves to work in commoditized markets if we can help it. That was a failure of our predecessor, and so we've tried to avoid that tremendously, and I don't really want to get into that. I wouldn't want to invest in KA, KU, or any other technology because I think there's plenty of people doing that, whether it's government or commercial environments. So to me, it's more about partnering together. So it's working together. I think there's going to be solutions that are L-band only. They're going to be LKA. There's going to be LKU. There's going to be KA-KU. I think the more important part is bringing that as flexibly as we can to the customers with devices, with service packages, with approaches, with coverage the best we can, and that's kind of how we focus on it.
Samer, any thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more with Matt, and I think for being the operator, probably the only operator in the panel that doesn't have a strategy yet or plans in place for next gen, although we're looking at the different bands, we believe that the customer is looking for a managed solution, irrespective of what frequency band that is, something that works. And there are applications for L-only, applications for LKA, applications for LKU. L-band is very important. We are looking to widen our scope, but what we're looking to do is not to just build constellations and build it and they will come. We're looking to align and partner with other entities to see where the market is demanding, what the market is demanding, and where there's a demand, instead of just adding capacity for the sake of adding capacity. Now, having said this, we are still focused on L-band. We will not dilute our focus on S-band. We understand that the customer is looking for a solution that will continue to exist in a few years' time, and a solution that will continue to exist at better prices than current prices. So we are committed to our L-band capabilities, and we will continue to do so.
And how about you, Andy, as somebody with the longest legacy here in L-band?
Well, I think first and foremost we expect L-band to continue to grow, but to grow into different applications, areas than they have historically have served. A good example of that is our BGAN service, which is primarily a land-based terminal that, half the size of a laptop that you can carry with you. The performance enhancements on that are coming, we think offer great growth. It's in M2M, as Matt has alluded to as well, much higher growth in M2M services, but focus more on narrowband data applications than we've historically seen. Prior to that, particularly on mobile applications, we were using L-band to try to stretch it to the max for both aero applications and other applications on the move. And in the end of the day, there's only so much spectrum available there, and it's a narrowband spectrum. KU falls into a different camp, and obviously when we look to make the investment in KU or KA, we assess the spectrum position. And the reality is that in KA, both commercial and military, there's just a huge amount of spectrum available. And that spectrum can be used when you're delivering services to the terminal to deliver much higher throughput at a much lower price. And that's just the economics of the technology combined with the spectrum availability that you can use. And so we assessed that, and we made a sort of a clean sheet of paper decision that that was the way to go based on our belief that bandwidth demands are going to continue to grow and grow considerably for mobile type applications. So we have our foot in both camps, so to speak. I mean, we're in the L-band camp, narrow band, with trying to enhance those services with new applications, which I think will continue to grow, and the pie will grow for people. It'll be a bit slower, we think, over the next couple of years, but then pick up. And we also see that Ka band over the long haul is going to provide a new set of capabilities, 50 megabit to a 60 centimeter antenna, which is quite revolutionary, but also fits with what you're seeing on land. And at the end of the day, that's what people are looking for in aircraft, and they're looking for on the move as well. So we think that long-term demand trend will be there, but getting the timing right in these things is always the trick from a commercial operator's perspective.
The U.S. Navy has launched its first mobile user objective system satellite, just recently launched it, but it's going to be a few years before the system is fully capable. Anybody see a window of opportunity there to take advantage? How about Matt?
Well, I don't know when MUOS will ever be here. It seems to be, especially in this budgetary environment, it's going to be difficult to field very quickly. And I was never worried that MUOS was going to come in and take any more than WGS is going to take all the requirements at the broadband state. So, MUOS, if and when it ever comes, will be fully utilized, and there'll still be lots of needs again for many other things to happen. Our focus has been more on, again, complementing these other things. So, for example, today Jitters is happening, though it's still slow in terms of its adoption. MUOS is coming. I'd like to get, since we're global, we provide a interesting over-the-horizon, non-line of sight capability. If we could find a way of getting that into all those devices that are currently out there as another alternative, that's really, I think, a winning strategy for us. So that's what we're working with a number, probably, of people in this room. And I think you'll see us more, penetrate more tactical radios in general with an underlying capability that if they need more bandwidth, then they can go after point-to-point or ground-based solutions too.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
On MUOS?
Yeah, what do you think of MUOS? Okay.
So I think MUOS is, again, it's going to offer some very sophisticated capability when it's finally deployed. The unfortunate problem about MUOS, though, is the advanced payload is not going to be turned on for a while. And the terminals that would talk to that payload, they don't even have a waveform yet to build to. So I think if you look at what Intelsat did, and this is no different than the rigorous process that we go through when we make any kind of investment. We looked at the UHF demand profile, we looked at the users, we looked at the terminals, and we said, there's going to be a gap. And we can solve that gap, and we can do it cost effectively without a dime of the government's money up front. And so we invested in UHF. And we built a payload with Boeing on IS-22, which launched a couple of weeks ago. It was fully purchased by the Australian Defence Force and then subleased back to the US DoD. We have another payload that's being built now in Boeing's facility, IS-27. That'll launch in January. And that has a UHF payload on it as well that will go into the Atlantic. And I think when commercial companies make these kinds of investments, again, using a very rigorous process that is logical and has been used for other types of business investments, what is happening in the UHF world for us right now is politics and other program protection pressures have created a situation where the government isn't accepting this gap anymore, and the IS-27 payload is not being viewed as part of the capability for the warfighter. And it's incredibly disappointing and discouraging for commercial companies who are putting our money towards warfighter capability and not being embraced by the community.
I'd like to maybe pick up on that theme a little bit. You have your example with IS-27. There's another example, and it's in the commercial remote sensing industry, where the U.S. government encouraged two companies, Digital Globe and GeoEye, to invest in next generation systems with the assumption of a funding line over 10 years that would be available. And now the word from the U.S. government is that they're going to significantly reduce imagery purchases. I'm wondering what kind of a message that sends to companies like yours, who operate in a different business, but you operate in a similar way to the commercial remote sensing companies tip. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know I do. I mean, the problem we're talking about here is a broader problem. As you just mentioned, the decision to cut back dramatically on the purchase of Digital Globe and GeoEye imagery sent kind of a chilling message through the industry to those of us who try to advocate for the U.S. government as a user in our boardrooms when it comes to allocating capital for projects that we think may be of interest to the U.S. government. But it's a reminder that the rhetoric of partnership that we often hear from our U.S. government customers is not the same as the kind of partnership discussions we have in industry. And industry partnerships entail binding obligations on the part of both. They entail, if you create expectations and then you don't fulfill those expectations, there are implications to that. But kinds of partnerships that we often engage in with our government actually present a significant amount of risk to us, and Digital Globe and GeoEye are seeing that. I think Intelsat is struggling with it on UHF, and we see it every day in the marketplace as well. I think it's in the budget environment that we are entering, we're going to have to do a better job of creating real partnerships where government can deal with industry in such a way that industry can be secure in making these sorts of investments, because I can't speak for all of us, but at least the FSS operators are predominantly commercial businesses. Our main metric is return on investment. If we invest in capabilities that the government decides unilaterally they no longer are interested in after creating an expectation that they might be interested in them, it's very hard for us to go back and do things that are in the interest of the government in the future. I think it's a serious problem. I think we need to have a much deeper dialogue with our government customers to understand that parts of industry who are predominantly commercial are asking themselves whether or not they even want to do business with the U.S. government going forward in a lot of cases. That's a pretty serious matter, particularly if the U.S. government happens to be 80% dependent on the capabilities that small number of providers brings.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, I think we all would like to see more predictability and more commitment out of governments and consistency on the programs. Having said that, and probably Matt and ourselves, and to some extent Samer is in a different position as well, we're different than the FSS operators because we don't look for upfront and firm commitments for the capacity on the satellites. We sell on a demand basis, and we try to look at long-term trends, and to some extent you'd say we take more risk in looking at those long-term trends and trying to predict them, but we are more or less diversifying the business on both commercial and governmental business. And so we're less subject to some of these changes in thinking than others, and I guess in this case that's a benefit because we can be providing a resilience and a backup and a capability that's there that we're putting up anyway. And it's a different thinking and approach to our business models than exists for fixed satellite operators historically. And that I just wanted to point out because I think it is quite fundamental to this problem. We're not backing away from supporting government business by any stretch, and it's not entered our mind.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I'll just add a very quick point. I fully agree with what Andy is saying, but to add the word innovation, which you've brought up a few times, I think the commercial satellite operators bring that element as well, and that is very important going forward.
Look, well, we're all big boys, so I can understand why, especially from a commercial perspective, we expect our customer to act in their behavior. I think it would be far worse if the government was suddenly saying, you know, we encouraged you to do this, and now we're pulling the rug out and we're going to do it ourselves. But we understand the kind of environment we're in right now isn't exactly an easy one for the customer. So I think there's some sympathy back and forth. But you know, we do make these business decisions. We know that we're out there. It could have big ramifications to us if we make the wrong decision. But on the other hand, we have to also, I think that's why we're such a potentially good partner for the government, because we can be a little bit more flexible. But we do need more predictability. I don't want in any way speak against that. It's a difficult thing to get out of this customer.
If I could just say one more thing, because I think if the government wants the FSS operators or all commercial operators to just look at their business as opportunistic, hey, okay, no risk. If I got it, it's left over, and you want to buy it, and my commercial customers haven't bought it yet, you can have it. But I don't think that is what they need in the future. I think in this budget environment, if they don't have commercial companies investing in capability, and in some cases this is unique capability. UHF is unique, right? Wideband transponders, they're unique. You don't just turn around and sell that kind of capacity to a commercial customer. So if they want that kind of investment and that kind of partner, which in a budget environment that they're facing is exactly what they should want, then they have to change the way they are interacting with us. Otherwise, we can opportunistically serve them, but that doesn't mean, that's not a very good plan. That's a hope. And is that what they want their warfighters, you know, relying on, is a hope that we're going to have capacity in the future for them? That's not a plan.
I mean, it's a bigger problem, right? I mean, using the word that Kay used, it's an opportunistic relationship we have right now. And it's productive, and it's been supportive because there's good business that we've got out of that. But, you know, we're probably not going to have time to talk about the whole hosted payload world, but that's a completely opportunistic sort of environment too. And I know we're all frustrated at that because there's been very little progress really in the last 5 or 6 years on that. A lot of talk, no policy, no procedures, no incentives, nothing really changing anything, but everybody is declaring victory and saying, isn't this great? We have chirp up there, as if, I'm almost wondering if that's a distraction in some way, as opposed to it's being used as almost like it's a demonstration. It's a demonstration of nothing. It was another opportunistic sort of situation that worked out positively. But you know, what we need is a more cohesive strategy and not just talk about doing that, but actual changes in procedures and processes and incentives to make this. I think a lot more can happen really between it. I think we could save the government billions of dollars. I think we could, you know, and I think we need to right now because frankly, this is a time when billions of dollars need to be saved. And so the only way to do that is somehow in conjunction much more closely together. So.
Okay, we are out of time, but I have to give you a chance, Tip, to respond to that if you wanted to, because Chirp is aboard one of your satellites.
Well, I mean, Matt, in a sense, is right. It was opportunistic. I mean, we created the opportunity to do it, but and I think we learned a lot from it. But Matt is also right that I think maybe we're patting ourselves on the back and declaring victory on hosted payloads on the basis of one relatively simple project there. Now, I know, to be fair, a lot of people in government are thinking very hard about this and how to leverage it and how to go forward. But Matt's overall point, I agree with. We're really missing a chance, not only in hosted payloads, but in our normal investment planning to do a much better job for the government, but the government has to let us do that by collaborating with us in a different way than they have been in the past.
Thanks. That's all the time we have, Todd. That's all the time we have. So thanks for joining us, and please join me in giving our panelists a hand.
Thank you, Mr. Furster, and thank you again to all the panel members for that enlightening discussion about the space business. Before we head to the luncheon, we'll be showing a video from SES, so please stay to watch. After the video, we will adjourn for the General James E. Hill Lifetime Space Achievement Award Luncheon, which will be held next door in the Colorado Hall. Thank you.